Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people collectively recorded in my trees. Episode 12, Leadlight Memorial. Today's podcast is on Arthur Llewellyn. He was the father-in-law of Philip and Matilda Bayliss, who were my great-great-uncle and great-great-aunt. So, whilst not directly linked to me, there's a very interesting story that comes about with Arthur and his family. When researching the partners of the Bayliss children, I uncovered that a Bayliss brother and sister were married to a Llewellyn brother and sister. This wasn't uncommon in those days. With a lack of travel, quite often communities would get together and have local events with local farming communities, and coupled with large families, it was quite common that you would meet your future husband or wife through the sibling and the families of the in-laws. When researching the Llewellyns, I discovered that a beautiful leadlight memorial was donated to the Deniliquin Hospital by Arthur Llewellyn, and it still exists today, and I'll be putting photos up of that leadlight for you to see on my Facebook page, Family History Mysteries. Arthur Llewellyn was born on the 1st of May 1850 in Liverpool, Lancashire, England. His parents were William and Catherine Llewellyn, and William, his father, was a spirits dealer. By the time Arthur was 21 years old, he was in an apprenticeship with a timber merchant, and he decided to emigrate to Australia on the 28th of July 1876 from Liverpool, England, on the ship Galahad. At the age of 28, in 1878, he married Annie Price in Victoria. Annie was born in Tasmania on the 15th of January 1850. Her parents were Evan Price and Ellen Plunkett, and both were convicts that had been sent to Tasmania. So Annie's father, Evan Price, he was born at Breckenshire, Wales, in 1817 to Reese Price and Mary Price. He was tried at the Brecon Coventry on the 1st of January 1844 for stealing 24 sheep from Mr. John Jones. He got 14 years in transportation for that offence. The notes that were in his convict record were that he was a labourer and could plough, and that made a difference for where he was about to go. He could neither read nor write. He was Protestant, 5'9", brown hair and whiskers, blue eyes and a large nose. It also stated that he was married with 2 children at the time of his transportation. He was sent to Maria Island on the ship Maria Soms. He embarked on the 8th of March 1844 and arrived in Tasmania on the 30th of July 1844. At this time, Maria Island was set up as a probation station, and Evan was sent there for 1 year and 9 months. Convicts were primarily engaged in agricultural work, so no doubt that's why it was stated that he could plough on his record. Overcrowding was a constant problem, and Maria Island was closed down in 1850 as a convict settlement. He emerged from the gang at Maria Island on the 30th of April 1846. He was now 29 years old. Evan was sent to Prosser's Plains, which is now known as Buckland, and it's just inland from Maria Island, and he was sent there on the 26th of May 1846 to work for a Mr. Thomas Cruttenden. A conditional pardon was recommended for him on July 1852. He was granted a ticket of leave on the 8th of February 1853. However, it was revoked only 3 days later, and there was an incident where he was not assisting his master at Bucklands, Thomas Cruttenden, when Thomas was robbed by bushrangers. So again, on the 22nd of March 1853, he got his ticket of leave revoked. He was eventually granted his ticket of leave on the 5th of April 1853. And he died on the 11th of September 1875 in Richmond. His son Andrew was listed as the informant, and Evan was only 58 when he died. Now to Evan's wife, Ellen. Ellen Plunkett, as we knew her on the marriage certificate, was actually born Ellen Prendergast because she was married prior to coming to Tasmania. So she was born in Sligo, Ireland in 1820. Just lists her mother on her convict record. So her mother was Jane, and at the time of her conviction she had 6 siblings, 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Her first husband was James Plunkett. From the convict records we know that he was in the 76th Regiment in America in 1847. Her sons came out to Tasmania with her. Her firstborn son was John Plunkett. He was born in 1841, so he was 6 years old when he came on the trip with his mother, and Henry Plunkett, that was born in 1845, and he was 2 years old on the trip. I have tried to find information on these boys. With women convicts, they were either sent to the Cascade factory or they are sent out in service, and if the boys were old enough, they weren't newborns, sounds like they would have been sent straight to an orphan school. And there is a record on a Henry Plunkett without the double T, just one T, and it's a death recorded on February 26, 1854. An 8-year-old boy, Henry Plunkett, died at the orphan school in Hobart of dysentery following measles. It doesn't exactly match up to his birth records. However, it's seeming likely that we've got a Henry Plunkett, his mother's a convict, and this would be the most likely place that he would have been at that age. Ellen was tried on the 6th of March 1847 in Inniskillen, Fermanagh, Ireland, for stealing clothes from Mr. John Barney. She received 7 years transportation, and it was her first offence. She embarked on the ship the Waverley on the 14th of July 1847 and arrived in Tasmania on the 26th of October 1847. It does mention on the shipping manifest that she was married and she had 2 children on board. On her convict record, she's listed as a laundress and housemaid, so at the time of her conviction, 27 years old. She could read but could not write. 5 foot 2.5 inches, dark complexion, black hair, brown eyes, large mouth, and her religion was Catholic. As soon as she arrived, she was placed on the Anson Hulk ship. So on her record it stated that was the intention for her to stay for 6 months, and she stayed there until the 5th of May 1848. The HMS Anson was a 1,870-tonne warship which arrived in Hobart in 1844 with 499 male convicts. So after disembarking all of the convicts, she was refitted as a prison and towed to the Prince of Wales Bay at Risdon near Hobart, where she was moored. The Anson Hulk housed female convicts from 1844, so including our Ellen in 1847, in an attempt to alleviate the overcrowding at the Cascades female factory as more female convict ships arrived. Once the convicts had served their 6 months probation, consistent with what Ellen had received, then they were hired out into service as probation pass holders. In 1848, after her time on the Hulk, she was employed on probation with Jemima Hobbs of Campbell Street, Hobart. Ellen delivered an illegitimate child on the 15th of January 1850 named Anne, and this is Annie, Arthur Llewellyn's wife. So she was given permission to marry Evan Price on the same day, so I am assuming he was the father. And Evan and Ellen married 1 month later at Prosser's Plains at St John's the Baptist Church. Evan was listed as a farm labourer as his occupation, and they both signed with a mark. In August 1850, Ellen was sent in service at Prosser's Plains. So she was moved from Hobart to Prosser's Plains with the fact that she's married. She still isn't free yet, so she still is in service, but can move to where her husband is. Ellen was granted a ticket of leave in mid-May 1951. She's had one little cross on her record. In July 1851, she was fined for being drunk. And in September 1852, her ticket of leave was revoked. So it was again restored in February 1853. And then finally on the 6th of March 1854, she was free of servitude. And she received her certificate of freedom in Buckland on the 11th of July 1854. On the 11th of July 1854 in Buckland with her husband. And I cannot find a death record for Ellen. She possibly remarried in Tasmania, but I'm having difficulty accessing that at this point. They had 5 children other than Anne. Their births were registered at Prosser's Plains or Buckland between 1851 and 1859. I can't find Anne's official birth record. The only record I have of her birth is on Ellen's convict record. So out of the 6 children, it seems that 3 children survived childhood. The first child was Mary after Annie, and she was born in October 1851 at Prosser's Plains, and she died in Deniliquin, New South Wales in September 1898 at the age of 46. There's not a lot of evidence of Mary in terms of her immigration coming from the Tasmanian mainland through to Australia, but both Annie and her brother Michael were living in Deniliquin or near Deniliquin around that time, so my assumption is that she has either come to visit them or possibly come to assist either Michael or Annie with their children. Michael Andrew Price was born at Sorrel, Tasmania, not far away from Buckland, on the 16th of June 1857. He had immigrated to Moama, New South Wales by 1886 when he married Susan Varco. Michael owned land near Deniliquin, and then he moved his family to Yillamilling, Western Australia on the 12th of October 1904, and he was a farmer over there. He died in July 1940 in Western Australia, aged 83. So back to Annie and Arthur Llewellyn. So Arthur was an accountant and was employed as an auditor for a range of businesses and organisations in Deniliquin. He was licensed as an auctioneer in 1892, and in 1893 he was appointed as an accountant for the local council. They had 5 children, and 4 of those children survived childhood. Their first child, Catherine Annie, known as Katie, was born in 1879 in Moama, and she died at the age of 14 years and 3 months on the 12th of February 1894 of typhoid fever at their home in Deniliquin, Thornville. Arthur was the secretary of the hospital at the time, and when a new section of the hospital was built in 1894, he commissioned a beautiful Leadlight memorial for her and presented it to the hospital in 1904. And I'll just read an article to you outlining this. It's in the Independent Deniliquin newspaper on June 1904. Handsome presentation. Mr. A. Llewellyn, Secretary of the Deniliquin Hospital, has made a handsome presentation to the institution. It is in the form of a memorial window, and it will be placed in the entrance of the new building. The window is surrounded by a floral design and contains a 12-inch figure of Hygieia, with a red cross symbolical of the hospital above it, and a medallion below with the words, "This memorial window is presented by Arthur Llewellyn in memory of his beloved daughter Katie, who died on the 12th of February 1894. Hygieia is the Greek goddess of health, meaning cleanliness and hygiene, so her name is the source of the word hygiene. So that is what Arthur chose to place as part of the pictorial on the Leadlight window. I'll have photos of the Leadlight at the Deniliquin Hospital, and it exists today, so anyone can go into the Deniliquin Hospital and have a look at the beautiful Leadlight window. Their second child was William Evan Price Llewellyn. He was born in Moama on the 1st of January 1881. He worked as a stock and station agent and an auctioneer in Deniliquin, and he married Matilda Emily Bayliss in 1913 in Victoria, who is my great-great-aunt. By 1917, they moved to Goulburn, and William died at Queanbeyan in 1944, aged 63. One of their sons, John Weaver Llewellyn, served in World War II as a signalman. Unfortunately, he suffered what the Army records put as nerves after the war, which we now know as PTSD or anxiety or depression. It did mention in a court briefing that he required medication as a result. He was a grazier who lived just outside of Goulburn, and within 7 years of his military service, he was charged several times with driving under the influence. So I can deduce from that he clearly didn't cope and had long-lasting effects from the war. And he died at age only 37, where he was involved in a single vehicle car accident and his vehicle pinned him underneath. So quite a tragedy for William and Matilda. And John never married. Their third child, Evelyn Harriet Llewellyn, was born in Moama in 1892, and she died in Victoria in 1943. You may recall her name. I covered her in a lot of detail in episode 8, Military Man. So please go back and have another listen to that podcast. She was married to Philip Bayliss, who was the central person in my story in episode 8. Doris Amelia Emily Llewellyn was born in 1890 in Deniliquin. She was the fourth child to the family, and she married Victor Charles Hutton Oddie, a farmer, in 1914 in Victoria. They had 6 children, and Doris died in Deniliquin in 1969, aged 79. Arthur Llewellyn, he died at his home Roseville in Deniliquin on the 24th of January 1905, and he was aged only 54. And I'm going to read a few articles regarding his death, because he was well respected in the town and did a lot for the town. So on the 26th of January 1905, in the Wagga Wagga Express, Mr. Arthur Llewellyn, an old and respected resident of Deniliquin, died there on Monday from heart failure. He had been under treatment in Melbourne for some time previously. After his return, seemed to be better. Shortly after breakfast, one of his daughters found him dead. Mr. Llewellyn, who was 54 years of age, has left a widow, 2 daughters and 1 son. He was a native of England and arrived in Australia while quite young. For many years, he was the indefatigable secretary of the local hospital and auditor for F.S. Faulkner and Sons Limited. Just a side note, F.S. Faulkner and Sons were large landowners out at Wanganella and were responsible for the merino wool strain that is famous today and is used in clothing today. He was also the auditor for the Riverina Frozen Meat Company, the Riverina Brewery Company, and several other large institutions. His skill as an accountant was recognised as exceptional. And quite a lengthy article in the Independent Deniliquin, January 1905, obituary. Death has removed from our midst the best known businessman in the district in the person of Mr. Arthur Llewellyn, who expired suddenly at his residence on Monday last from heart failure. The deceased had been in very delicate health for some considerable time past. Some few months ago he paid a visit to Sydney and there consulted a leading medical man, by whom he was told that his heart was in a very weak state and that he must take great care of himself, avoid excitement, and for a time, at any rate, abstain from business worries. Shortly after consulting the doctor, Mr. Llewellyn had the misfortune to meet with a serious accident by falling down a flight of stairs, for some time confined to his bed in Melbourne. He partially recovered and came home to Deniliquin in charge of a nurse. He was confined to his house for several weeks and was not allowed to see anybody but his own family and medical attendants. Recovering somewhat, he was able to get about a little, although still very weak, but was not able to do much, and it was noticed that although he attended the annual meeting of the hospital subscribers, he was not able to discharge the duties of secretary, which were kindly undertaken by Mr. J. Skinner. On Monday morning last, Mr. Llewellyn partook for breakfast and appeared to be better and more cheerful than he had been for some time, but shortly afterwards he collapsed suddenly, and when picked up it was found that his life was extinct. The deceased gentleman was born in England. He had resided in Deniliquin for about 20 years. During the greater part of that time, he held the position of secretary at the Delinquent Hospital, in which institution he always took the liveliest interest. As an accountant and auditor, he was considered a thoroughly competent man. For many years, he was the auditor of the Delinquent Moama Railway Company, Elliott's Riverina Brewery Company, the Riverina Frozen Meat Company, F.S. Faulkner and Sons, the Municipal Council, Deniliquin Jockey Club, and a number of private business firms, and was also honorary auditor of the Church of England Parochial Council. Mr. Llewellyn, who was 54 years of age, was generally respected by all classes as an upright, honourable man, and the vacancy caused by his death will not be easily filled. The deepest sympathy is felt for the deceased's wife and family. The former has been an invalid for some years past, and her suffering must have much been intensified by the sad and sudden death of her husband. We join in expressing our heartfelt sympathy for them. The funeral on Tuesday afternoon was largely attended. A short service was held at St Paul's Church. 6 brothers of the MUIOOF, of which Lodge deceased was a member, acted as pallbearers, and Mr. G.W. Heriot read the service at the graveside. With Freemasonry and Masonry, so that was what was referred to at the end of his obituary in terms of saying that 6 brothers from the MUIOOF. So that means that he was a Freemason or a member of the Masonry. And this was a fraternal organisation. They trace their origins back to the stonemasons at the end of the 14th century. And modern Freemasonry broadly insists that a volume of scripture be open in a working lodge. Every member professes belief in a supreme being. No women be admitted, and that the discussion of religion and politics does not take place within the lodge. The Masonic Lodge is the basic organisational unit of Freemasonry. They meet regularly, they conduct the usual formal business of any small organisation, they elect new members, appoint officers and take their reports, consider correspondence, bills and annual accounts, and organise social and charitable events. The meeting may perform a ceremony to confer a Masonic degree or receive a lecture, which is usually on some aspect of Masonic history or ritual. And at the conclusion of the meeting, the lodge may hold a formal dinner or festive board where they sometimes involve toasting and song. The bulk of Masonic rituals consists of degree ceremonies. So you enter as an apprentice, and at some stage you'll pass a degree of fellowcraft, and then you raise to the degree of Master Mason. In each of these ceremonies, the candidate must first take the new obligations of the degree, entrust with secret knowledge, including passwords, signs, grips, secret handshakes, confined to his new rank. Most lodges have some sort of social functions, allowing members, their partners, and non-Masonic guests to meet openly. Often coupled with these events is the discharge of every Mason and lodge's collective obligation to contribute to charity. Candidates for Freemasonry usually have met most of the active members of the lodge that they're joining before they're elected for initiation. The onus is upon the candidates to ask to join. They may be encouraged to ask, but they don't get invited. Once the initial inquiry is made, a formal application may be proposed and seconded or announced in open lodge, and a more or less a formal interview usually follows. Then if the candidate wishes to proceed, references are taken up during a period of notice so that members may inquire into the candidate's suitability and discuss it. Finally, the lodge takes an officially secret ballot on each application before the candidate is either initiated or rejected. A minimum requirement of every Freemason is that the candidate must be free and of good reputation, and the object is that every Mason should be a proper and responsible person. Additionally, most Grand Lodges require a candidate to declare a belief in a supreme being, and the candidate can interpret this in their own way. Remember that a religious discussion is commonly prohibited. So it could be that he is going to swear on personal faith to do good as a Mason. He also has to promise to keep the secrets of the degrees to outsiders and to support a fellow Mason in distress. There's a formal instruction as to the duties of a Freemason, but on the whole, Freemasons are left to explore the craft in a manner that they find most satisfying. Some enjoy the dramatics, Others are interested in the management and administration of the lodge. Others explore the history, the ritual and the symbolism of the craft, and others will focus on the lodge's charitable side. So it's very much a brotherhood association, and quite often I've noticed that men quite often have the brothers as the pallbearers at the funeral. So it's very much mentioned in the funeral notes or the obituary, the involvement of the Freemasons at that time. Annie Llewellyn died on the 12th of February 1834 in Deniliquin, aged 84. So even though the previous article mentioned how she wasn't in the best of health, she did live another 30 years beyond her husband. And there was a small obituary that was in the local newspaper, the Independent Deniliquin, in February 1934. Obituary, Mrs. Annie Llewellyn. The death occurred in Deniliquin in an early hour on Monday morning of Mrs. Annie Llewellyn, aged 84, a well-known identity of this town where she has resided for a considerable period. She was born in Tasmania. For some years past, Mrs. Llewellyn has been living with one of her daughters, Mrs. V. Oddie, and she's also survived by one son, William of Goulburn, and a daughter. The funeral took place at 5 o'clock yesterday evening at St. Paul's, Church of England. So for Annie, coming from a convict past and then marrying quite an upstanding citizen from what we can gather, and going on and having children of her own, and going through also tragedy in their lives and having their daughter at the cusp of being an adult on her own, sadly passing away from typhoid. And what a beautiful gesture that her father had placed for her in the hospital, which, as I said, is quite valued and treasured, and they're on display in the Deniliquin Hospital today. If you have a story that you would like on a future episode, please go to my Facebook page, Family History Mysteries. And also, if you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your own family tree, please message me through my Facebook page.